So I think we've all been watching the actions of Congress over several months on their efforts to replace and repeal Obamacare. In October, the President Trump signed an executive order that could end the payments to insurance companies that are being used to lower out-of-pocket costs for consumers. So in building this agenda, we actually got a call from the insurance companies and said, gosh, I think it was a specific source that gave us a call and said, we ought to really be taking a little bit of time on this particular agenda because this could have a huge impact in Montana. And so last night I was kind of going out there just seeing what is the impact of this. Do we know much more about that? Because I'm not too familiar with that. And boy, there's all kinds of news out there, and I really didn't know what news source to go to because there's some fake news out there, right? So I went to the source, and so the source for me was a tweet by President Trump. So this is what he said about his executive order. Health insurance stocks, which have gone through the roof during the Obamacare years, plunged yesterday after I ended the Dems' windfall. The second tweet that came later that day was very proud of my executive order, which will allow greatly expanded access and far lower costs for health care. Millions of people benefit. We're going to invite John Doran up here, and I was looking, John, I don't think you're a tweet guy. I'm not sure. I was looking for your tweet on this, but our Blue Cross Blue Shield, Monica, we got to get her tweeting. We thought we'd share a little bit of perspective, whether you're for or against or where we're at on the Obamacare work that's happening. We thought John Doran, who's actually the Senior Director of Public Relations with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana, might be able to provide some insight on what's happening there and what else is coming down the pike, perhaps, that will impact Montanans through the healthcare industry, insurance industry.
Well, thanks, Jean, and it's great to see everybody. Many thanks to the Montana Chamber Foundation for another great healthcare forum here. It's great that Pacific Source could call and say, hey, let's do this topic, and oh, by the way, let's make John do it. I told a colleague this morning that I was going to be talking about the ACA, and she asked if I needed any help, and I said, nah, I can talk about that in my sleep, which is pretty appropriate because with sine die of the special session last night at 1:30, I think I'm still half asleep here. It's great to see Representative Kelker and Senator Sands and others who were there till the bitter end last night and know that I'm not the only one who's a little puffy-eyed this morning. Obviously the ACA is a hot topic, and deservedly so. Healthcare really affects all of us, and I think that it's deserved of all the discussion as we find our way forward in improving our healthcare system. Jean kind of stole my other thunder. I was going to say that, with such a fast-changing pace for the ACA, I haven't checked Twitter yet to see if there's something new I need to talk about, but it's certainly the case with the way that things are moving. There's been a pretty wild ride since 2010 when the law was enacted, and even more so since 2014 when it was implemented, and we all started kind of the frantic pace to educate Montanans about the new benefits that they have, enroll them in health plans to get them the access that they need, and continue kind of this roller coaster that we've seen since 2014. So there's been a lot of volatility in the marketplace since 2014. Some of the changes and potential changes that we've seen in the last year and a half have added to that unpredictability in the marketplace, and I'd like to talk about a few of those things today. It's obviously, there's two sides to every issue, and so I'm going to try and lay out both sides today as best as possible so that we're really clear with why some of the changes are being proposed and what some of the implications of those changes are. And then I want to make sure I offer some time for questions before we allow Commissioner Rosendale to get up here and talk about something else that's really important in our markets and in Montana and across the nation. I'm going to take this a little bit in reverse chronological order. So over the past year or so, we've seen many efforts in Congress to repeal and or replace the Affordable Care Act, and certainly those have been unsuccessful. So in the past couple of months especially, we've seen some action in the administration to kind of unwind some of the components of the ACA. Most recently this week, we have seen that Senator McConnell is including in the tax reform discussion the elimination of the individual mandate for the ACA. And the individual mandate in the ACA is really one of the pillars that are kind of the foundation of the law. So we have the subsidies that help offset the cost, we have expanded access to health care, and we have the mandate, which hopefully is the incentive. Maybe it's the stick, I guess you could argue on the other side, but it's the incentive to get people into the marketplace so we have broad participation and continuous enrollment in the ACA marketplace. So I think there's, the one side of the argument on eliminating the individual mandate is that, you're really requiring someone to have health insurance whether they need the care or not, and that if you can unwind that, then you allow folks maybe some cheaper options for health insurance. But I think the implication there is that, you eliminate the mandate, and therefore not everybody is required to have health insurance. And so what the implication could be is that the healthier folks who may not need a health insurance policy, may not see themselves as needing anything other than the emergency care through a hospital, are not going to purchase a health insurance plan. But the folks who do need that care and do need that preventive coverage are going to purchase the plan. And so therefore you have the risk of really moving into a high-risk pool where the folks who have the highest health care needs are the ones who are purchasing the health care, which artificially inflates the costs in that marketplace. So, there's certainly both sides of the individual mandate discussion, but I think the implication is that you really are going to kind of unwind some of the components or the pillars of the ACA, and then folks that really need the care potentially could be higher in cost for those folks. If you move back just a couple of weeks, I'm sure you've all read and heard as well that President Trump is eliminating the CSRs, which are essentially the cost-sharing reductions. And the cost-sharing reductions are one of two forms of subsidies that are available through the ACA. There are premium assistance or premium tax credits that are available, and then the cost-sharing reductions. And the cost-sharing reductions are kind of the second form of subsidy that help offset the cost for out-of-pocket expenses. They help reduce some of the co-insurance or the deductible levels and potentially the out-of-pocket maximums for those low-income folks who are eligible. And that has the real potential to, I think, further create some instability in the marketplace. There are three companies that are doing a great job in Montana of offering health care coverage. Together, all three companies have done a wonderful job of expanding access, reducing the uninsured rate in Montana to, from about 20% before 2014 down to around 6 or 7% now. And there were two choices for insurance companies this year. You could include that uncertainty around the CSRs into your rates, or you could not. And we saw one company that included it up front, and then once the CSRs were eliminated, you saw the other two companies that had to come back and adjust their rates to account for that. The way the ACA works is that instead of sending these tax credits or the cost-sharing subsidies directly to the consumer and saying, here, hopefully you'll buy the health insurance and not a new truck, they actually send that to the insurance companies, which then offset the cost of these subsidies for those consumers. And so insurance companies are required to offset those costs based on the eligibility criteria of the consumer. So let's just say a standard deductible is $1,500, and a person who's eligible for CSRs, that might reduce it down to $250 or $500 for a deductible. So when that money doesn't come to insurance companies and we're still required to offer that subsidy for the consumer, if that payment doesn't come to us, then we're upside down, and that's a cost that we'd have to absorb, which really doesn't further the stability for the insurance companies in the marketplace. So, we've advocated that we need stability, we need predictability, and we need to have those payments to be moving forward in the marketplace. And then about a month and a half or 2 months ago, it's all starting to run together, President Trump issued an executive order. And the executive order did three things. Number one, it's essentially a kind of an order to his administration to put these things into play. But number one, it allows companies to sell health insurance policies across state lines. Number two, it allows particularly small groups to associate with other groups to kind of increase their purchasing power by increasing the size of the group. And then the other thing it enables is the extension of the time period for short-term policies. So I'll kind of dig into each of those three in turn here. the selling across state lines and the expansion of associated health plans really go hand in hand. So I think you allow folks or smaller groups to pool together with other groups that would create a larger risk pool for those groups and potentially leverage the purchasing power. And then it allows companies to sell across state lines. I think the one side of the argument is that that's going to expand the choice in the marketplace and in competition. And with increased competition, sometimes can come lower costs. So I think that's the motive there, is to allow companies to compete in different markets, which hopefully creates more competition and lowers the costs. On the other side, I think there are a couple of things to be concerned about. Number one is the types of policies that are being sold across state lines. You know, Montana has very strict and I think very, very proper consumer protection policies in place, in particular with health insurance plans. So I think what we would need to be concerned about is if a plan that's being domiciled in another state that doesn't have as many protections as Montana comes in to Montana and sells policies that don't live up to our standards, that we just need to make sure that folks are not buying coverage that might not actually get them the care that they need, and that they're not these skimpy policies that don't really cover much at all. And then the other thing we need to make sure is that if a company is selling from across the state lines, that they have a proper and broad provider network, right? Because you all know, especially, that the provider network matters. And if you go out of network for your healthcare costs, then you're really going to be subject to higher costs than the in-network providers. So that's one thing that we've seen, you know, is if a company from Maryland, say, is going to sell policies in Montana, they may not have an adequate network that provides the low-cost access for consumers in Montana. So we got to make sure those two things happen if the associated health plans and selling across state lines move forward. And then the third component of the executive order was extending the short-term policies. Under the ACA and the Obama administration, there was a limit of 90 days to selling short-term policies. And short-term policies are essentially kind of a stopgap, right? For if you lose coverage for some reason or you move to Montana, that it's a stopgap until you can get the coverage you need. And with the 90-day policies, these short-term policies can be rated on a number of different things, but they're not always subject to what we call the 10 essential health benefits in the ACA. And those are the benefits that every plan sold in the individual market or the small group market must contain. And some folks are arguing that those essential health benefits are driving up the cost of care for someone who might not need all of those benefits. And so by extending these short-term policies to 364 days, you're allowing someone who might be very, very healthy or not need those 10 essential health benefits to get a plan that has a reduced level of benefits and then therefore at a lower cost. And so I think it expands choice from one regard and potentially provides lower cost health care for folks who might be healthier and not need all of those benefits. On the other side of the coin, however, you have the short-term policies which can be rated on health. So if you have better health, then you can have a lower premium, and they're going up in the same market against the ACA policies that can't be underwritten on health and have to live up to all of these 10 essential health benefits. And so the implication is therefore that you have two products, one that's regulated, one that's not regulated, in the same marketplace. And I think that has the implication or potential to implode that market and again, kind of create two separate risk pools within the same governed market. So it could add to the further instability of the marketplace. So those are some of the things that have been taking place the last couple of years, but I think we all have to ask ourselves, where do we go from here? Right? I mean, we've seen the ACA, it's been a lot of volatility since 2014. We have some continued unpredictability in the marketplace. It doesn't matter what industry you have, I think, from the standpoint of private business. What do we need from the government? We need predictability and we need a stable environment that we can understand what the rules are. So moving forward, we need to know if we're playing baseball on a baseball field or if we're playing soccer on an ice hockey rink, right? I mean, because different standards will apply, and we need to make sure that they're consistent and predictable. But bigger than that, we need to make sure we're maintaining access to health care, maintaining access to preventive coverage, to primary care coverage, because that's critical to creating better outcomes and eventually reducing the health care costs overall. And so controlling costs and creating better outcomes are the other pillars that we have to make sure we keep at the forefront of all policy that moves forward in our country and in Montana. You know, I referenced sine die to start this, and I want to reference it to end it because last night at about 1:30, a very appropriate measure happened in the House to close, and it was Representative Kelly Flynn from Townsend. And if any of you know Kelly, he's been a great champion of some rural policies as well as a steward of our land. Kelly has terminal cancer, and he doesn't have long to live. And it was true grit to have him in the throes of the special session, which any of the legislators here can attest is a very, very fast pace and many hours a day. Kelly gave one of those Lou Gehrig type speeches last night on the floor, and it was incredibly powerful, talking about how lucky he really is to have the chance to represent his people, have the chance to live a very eventful life. And he closed with something that was really powerful. I think that as we move forward, it was really what we have to keep in mind, and that is that, you know, we're all just people. And no matter what your politics are, there are things that are bigger than politics. And I think if we can keep anything at the forefront of our mind as we move forward with the ACA, it's that we're all bigger than politics, and we all matter, and what we do matters to all of us and all of our health. So with that, I'd open up the floor for any questions. Mr. Miltenberger in the back.
Thank you, John. That was a very fitting end to your presentation. Question, a few days ago I read that the opening day or two of open enrollment was very high numbers. I've been looking around. I haven't seen anything the last couple of days. Do you know if enrollment in Montana is following national averages, or we have high enrollment, low enrollment? What's it look like compared to last year?
That's a great question, and I can only speak for our company, but I think from an industry standpoint, we've seen a lot of activity and a lot of interest in enrollment already. Part of that is because it's a shorter enrollment cycle this year, so it's only a 6-week enrollment cycle, so I think there's been a little more activity to start the open enrollment process than some of the procrastination we've seen over the past several open enrollment cycles. But I think there's a lot of interest in the policies that are out there. Again, we have 3 great companies in Montana who are offering care for our folks, so there's been a lot of shopping that folks are doing, and there's been a lot of calls on the provider networks, who's in, who's out, what are the formularies for prescription drugs, and so a lot of activity. So I would say that enrollment is high. Certainly, we don't know the enrollment numbers until after the enrollment period closes, and we can figure, you know, did a person stay with Blue Cross? Did they move to a different company? Did a person move to Blue Cross from a different company? To figure out what those enrollment statistics are, but activity has been very high so far.
Thank you.
Yeah. Representative Kelker.
John, my experience with the health insurance companies in Montana has been that they have been very forthcoming, come to the table, part of the discussion in providing good quality health care in the state. What difference would it make if insurance became a sort of a multi-state activity? We have a pretty closed group in Montana, and there have been some benefits, I think, to that. But what would happen if we were dealing with multi-states beyond, you know, the differences in law?
I feel like I should answer that question with Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelker. No, I think it's a great question, and you know, we've always believed that healthcare is local. And I think all of you who deliver care in our state would argue the same to a certain degree, that, you know, we really are, especially in Montana, where we have, you know, a very rural healthcare structure, much different than other states. But I think we also have to make sure that here in Montana, we're the ones who are deciding the policies that move forward. We're the ones who are engaging with our legislators, engaging with our insurance commissioner, engaging with our providers and our insurance companies to make sure that we're providing the best care possible in Montana and continuing to advance the outcomes that we have. So from an insurance perspective, I think that we always want to be at the table, and I think that my industry colleagues in the room would say the same thing. We truly care about our members, and we truly care about partnering with providers to provide better care in Montana so that eventually better care can lead to lower costs. No questions from the back? I see a couple of folks heckling me here back there. All right, well, thanks very much, and I'm sure that any of the industry colleagues would be happy to answer any ACA-related questions one-on-one, and I'm certainly available as well. So thank you very much.
All right, let's give John a round of applause.